1867, the Dominion of Canada was formed. It consisted of 4 provinces: Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario. Within 4 years, the new country had grown past the shore of Lake Huron, through the vast prairies to the Pacific Ocean. The new country now stretched from sea to sea, but it faced enormous challenges. The nation was divided, not just by culture, traditions, and language, but also by geography. Something new was needed if the country was to unify itself and keep its claims in the Western Territories. Politicians would find the solution in a revolutionary piece of technology. They called it the Iron Horse. Connecting the country would not be easy. Financing a project of such scale would require millions of dollars, and the labor would be substantial. But it was essential, according to Canada's first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald. His vision was the Transcontinental Railway. Until this great work is complete, our Dominion is little more than a geographic expression, he told the House of Commons. He feared that Western Canada and the interests of the Hudson Bay Company were in jeopardy. Without a steel backbone holding the country together, Canada would remain disjointed and weak. He asked Canadians where they stood. Would they be loyal to the Crown and Canada, or be swept away by American nationalism? 1871. A rail or coach road becomes conditional to the acceptance of British Columbia into the Union. The government worked quickly to promise British Columbia a railway within 10 years. The controversy was immense. Newspapers in the East took a stand against it. The terms on which the ministry has determined to bring British Columbia into the Union are monstrous and unparalleled in the history of Canadian legislation. One cannot feel otherwise than amazed at the recklessness of our legislatures to thus blindly committing the country to an undertaking that will certainly cost $100 million. Many felt that British Columbia would eventually be annexed to the United States and could not justify the costly undertaking of a railway system. One MP from Halifax said, "Voting for the Pacific Railway would be a measure fraught with the greatest danger to the people of the Dominion." Despite opposition, British Columbia was accepted into Confederation. The threat of U.S. annexation was too great. Canada would get its railroad, but the controversy would continue. The contract for the railway was awarded to Sir Hugh Allan, a shipping magnate from Montreal. On April 2, 1873, suspicions of a scandal were confirmed by the Liberal opposition. Macdonald had granted Allan the railway contract in exchange for large campaign contributions. The building of the Canadian Pacific Railway was slowed. The scandal tainted the Prime Minister's reputation. Sir John A. Macdonald resigned. The unpopularity of the Conservative government led to a Liberal victory in the 1873 general election. Liberal Alexander Mackenzie became Prime Minister. North America was in the grips of an economic depression. Mackenzie believed the railway was no longer a priority. He was more fiscally minded and less willing to take expensive risks. His administration would only complete 700 miles of the Canadian Pacific, hardly enough to keep the project on track. The slow progress resulted in British Columbia threatening to secede from Confederation. Canadians again began to fear for the sovereignty of Canada. During the 1878 election, they would call for action. Conservative John A. Macdonald campaigned on his new national policy. He also promised to complete the Canadian Pacific Railway. He told voters his policies would unify and protect Canada from U.S. annexation. They believed him, and once again he became the Prime Minister of Canada. It wouldn't be until 3 years later, on February 16, 1881, that the Canadian Pacific Railway was incorporated and construction began. The new contract was given to Donald Alexander Smith, a businessman with experience with the Hudson Bay Company. He would oversee the project from beginning to end. British Columbians embraced the coming railroad. One British Columbia newspaper, the British Colonist, exclaimed, "The railway is coming. The iron horse will soon cause the hills to tremble before his giant tramp. The outlook is very pleasant. Business must revive and the hopes of hundreds be realized. Empty houses will be filled, unoccupied lands tilled, new resources developed, old enterprises strengthened, and new ones inaugurated." The BC portion of the line was contracted to Andrew Onderdonk, an American railway engineer with considerable experience in the United States. Onderdonk would have the enormous task of bringing the line through some of the most challenging territory in all of the Dominion. Through unparalleled engineering, Onderdonk bridged extensive canyons and tunneled under dozens of mountains. The route through the mountains required special attention to dangerous winter conditions. Measures would need to be taken to protect the line during the harsh mountain winters. Facing pressure from the government to keep costs down and construction swift, Onderdonk controversially turned to a cheap, alternative source of labor, the Chinese. Many British Columbians were against the use of Chinese men in construction. They wanted Canadian workers to settle in the West after the railway was built. A royal commission on Chinese immigration was set up to debate the labor issue. In 1882, MacDonald told the House of Commons, "It is simply a question of alternatives. Either you must have this labor, or you can't have the railway." Most members of Parliament agreed. Relief bill, which would grant the CPR a further $22.5 million. Despite the difficulty of the terrain and the cost of construction, the provinces of Canada were finally bridged together. The Canadian Pacific Railway was completed more than 5 years ahead of schedule. The last spike of the line was driven in Craiglachie, British Columbia on November 7, 1885. It would be hammered in by the Honorable Donald A. Smith. One newspaper recalled the event. "He took the maul in hand to drive the last spike, and after missing it a few times, he drove it home amid cheers from all present." Time would show that the Canadian Pacific Railway helped to fill the vast lands in the west of the Dominion. It held an immense nation firmly together. One railway engineer remarked, "Our railroad construction is the reverse in this country from what it is in any other. They are built in other countries to take people out. Here, we build a railroad so that people may go into the wilderness and settle it up." It's been said that without railways, there would be and could be no Canada.